Your name is the highest. Your name is the greatest. Your name stands above them all thrones and dominions, all powers and positions. Your name stands above them all, and the angels cry, holy, all creation cry.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters of Christ. Welcome to another reading through the Bible series with Christ Ministries. This is day or part 25 in our daily reading of God's Word. We are still in the book of Genesis, so let's go ahead and continue and see what God's Word says to us today. And the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph and said, "In my sleep a vine was before me, and on the vine there were 3 stems, and it was flourishing, having produced shoots. The grapes of a bunch of grapes were ripe, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. And I took the bunch of grapes and squeezed it into the cup and gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation. The 3 stems are 3 days. Yet 3 days, and Pharaoh will remember your office and restore you to your chief cupbearership. And you shall give Pharaoh's cup into his hand, in accordance with your former office, when you used to pour wine. But remember me through yourself, when it should go well with you, and you shall do mercy with me, and make mention of Pharaoh, and bring me out of this stronghold. For by stealth I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here I did nothing, but they put me into this pit." And the chief baker saw that he interpreted rightly, and he said to Joseph, "I saw a dream, and I imagine I was taking up on my head 3 baskets of coarse meal loaves. Now in the topmost basket was baker's work of all sorts, which the king Pharaoh eats, and the fowl of the sky were devouring them from the basket that was atop my head." Then Joseph said to him in reply, "This is my interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will take away your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds of the sky will eat your pieces of flesh from you." Wow. Now it came about on the 3rd day that Pharaoh had a birthday, and he was making a feast for all his servants. And he remembered the office of the chief cupbearer and the office of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted them. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, rather he forgot him. Now it came about after 2 years of days that Pharaoh saw a dream, and he imagined he was standing by the river, and look, coming up as it were out of the river were 7 cows, fair in form and choice in flesh, and they were grazing in the reed grass. And 7 other cows, ugly in form, scrawny in flesh, were coming up out of the river after them, and were feeding by the cows by the bank of the river. And the 7 cows that were ugly and scrawny in flesh, up the 7 cows that were fair in form and choice. Then Pharaoh woke, and he dreamed for the 2nd time, and look, 7 ears of grain, choice and fair, were coming up on one stalk. And look, 7 ears of grain, scrawny and wind blasted, were growing up after them. And the 7 ears of grain, scrawny and wind blasted, swallowed up the 7 choice and full ears of grain. Then Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. Now morning came, and his soul was troubled, and he sent for and called all the expounders of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh related this dream to them, and there was no one that could tell it to Pharaoh. And the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "I recall my fault today." Pharaoh became ugly with his servant, I'm sorry. Pharaoh became angry with his servants and put us into custody in the house of the chief butcher, both me and the chief baker. And we saw a dream in one night. He and I, we saw each one in accordance with his own dream. Now a young man was there with us, a Hebrew, servant of the chief butcher, and we related them to him, and he interpreted them to us. And it came about that just as he interpreted to us, so also it happened. And thus I was restored to my office, but he was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent for and called Joseph, and they brought him out of the stronghold and shaved him and changed his apparel. And he came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have seen a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. But I have heard them saying of you that you, I'm sorry, but I have heard them saying of you that you, on hearing dreams, interpret them. And Joseph said to Pharaoh in reply, without God, the safety of Pharaoh would not be answered. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, in my dream, I imagined I was standing by the bank of the river, and 7 cows, choice in flesh and fair in form, were coming up, as it were, out of the river, and were feeding in the reed grass. And look, 7 other cows were coming up out of the river, worthless and ugly in form and scrawny in flesh, such that I had not seen uglier in the whole land of Egypt. And 7 scrawny and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fair and choice cows, and they entered into their bellies. And they did not become distinguishable, considering that they had entered into their bellies. And their appearances were ugly as also at first. And after I awoke, I fell asleep, and I saw again in my sleep, and as it were 7 ears of grain, full and fair, were coming up on the stalk. Then 7 other ears of grain, scrawny and wind blasted, were growing up in its proximity to them. And the 7 scrawny and wind blasted ears of grain swallowed up the 7 fair and full ears of grain. So I spoke to the expounders, and there was no one to tell me. So Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 fair cows are 7 years, and the 7 fair ears of grain are 7 years. Excuse me. Pharaoh's dream is one, and the 7 scrawny cows that were coming up after them are 7 years, and the 7 scrawny and wind blasted ears of grain shall be 7 years of famine. Now, as for the word that I have spoken to Pharaoh, God showed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Look, 7 years are coming, greatly plenty in all the land of Egypt. Then afterwards will come 7 years of famine, and they will forget the abundance in the whole land of Egypt, and the famine will consume the land, and the plenty will not be observed on the land because of the famine that will be afterwards. For a it will be very severe. And as for Pharaoh's dream being repeated twice, because the matter that is from God will be real, and God will hasten to do it. Now then, search out a man sensible and intelligent, and appoint him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh make and appoint district governors over the land, and let them take 1/5 of all the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty, and let them gather all the provisions of these 7 good years that are coming, and let the grain be gathered under the authority of Pharaoh. Let provisions be kept in the cities, and the provision shall be kept for the land in regard to the 7 years of famine that will be in the land of Egypt, and the land will not be annihilated by the famine. And the words were pleasing before Pharaoh and before all his servants. And Pharaoh said to all his servants, surely we shall not find such a person who has divine spirit within. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, seeing that God has shown you all these things, there is no person more sensible and intelligent than you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall comply with your mouth. Only with regard to the throne will I be above you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Look, I am appointing you today over all the land of Egypt. And removing his ring from his hand, Pharaoh placed it on Joseph's hand and arrayed him in fine linen apparel and placed gold collar around his neck. And he mounted him on the second chariot of those that were his. And a crier cried out in front of him, and he appointed him over the whole land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without you, no one shall lift up a hand in reference to all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name, oh man, Son. He gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of Heliopolis, as a wife for him. All right, guys, we'll stop there. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow. God bless.